Good afternoon to those in Europe, and good morning to the brave ones who are watching us in Latin America. It's a pleasure to speak at this event, and let me thank the audience for taking the time to be with us. If we can move to the next slide, please. Good. Good. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to speak relatively briefly about three themes. The first is I want to speak about the modern realities of EU-Mercosur trade and investment. Second of all, I want to present you some statistics about the impact of the agreement. And finally, the third point is that I want to put the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement into the context of the debate about the EU open strategic autonomy and the EU strategic dependencies. So great. Yes, so basically the EU-Mercosur trade and investment. So for years, this relationship has been, I would say, misrepresented as one based on all colonial ties and trading commodities. Portugal and Spain leading the way, it's being the only countries who are interested in the agreement. I think this is wrong. And in reality, all EU member states have developed economic links with Mercosur. And these ties, they basically include all economic sectors such as IT, finance, manufacturing, banking, engineering, chemicals, in addition to, of course, agriculture. Agriculture deserves special attention because of the sensitivities that the sector raises for the ratification of the association agreement. The EU is the largest buyer of Mercosur agriculture exports. However, Mercosur exports in agricultural products to the EU represent only 3% of EU total agricultural imports once trade in agricultural goods within the EU is considered. And a significant part of EU imports of Mercosur agricultural products are actually inputs into EU agriculture, into EU agriculture. So Mercosur producers were adding value added to agriculture exports, the European agriculture exports. But again, I mean, if we the focus on agriculture takes away from the actual realities of the EU-Mercosur trade that I was speaking about before. So the Mercosur, let's take this example, Mercosur exports of business services, consulting, etc., to the EU were much larger than Mercosur exports of soja, beef, and sugar to the EU put together. In 2019, the EU and Mercosur exchanged services for a value of 32 billion euros. And these figures actually symbolize the movement away from trade in traditional sectors towards trade in more complex products, which is in tune with the realities of modern economies. Let me give you another example. Only the announcement of the association agreement between the EU and Mercosur led to a 10% increase in cross-border internet visits of e-commerce websites between the EU and Mercosur countries. I mean, I think that figure and that stat is really significant. And what is happening in trade is actually mirrored in investment. So I don't know if our audience know that a submarine cable between the EU and Mercosur has been built and is currently working towards supporting direct internet access between the two regions. And this will support trade in telecoms, in business services, in data transfers between companies and consumers within the two regions. So, and Argentina and Uruguay, to give you another example, have received data adequacy from the EU, and Brazil has data privacy laws which actually mirrors the EU General Data Protection Regulation, also known for its acronym as GDPR. So nonetheless, I mean, it's important also to put in context the elephant in the room, or the dragon in the room, is that despite the commercial ties that each region has gradually declined in relevance to one another, which has been exacerbated by the rise of China. And it is China, not the EU, the first destination of Mercosur total exports. And this is why the agreement is important, because the economic relationship between the EU and Mercosur has the potential to become a lot stronger if the rules that underpin those relationships improve. let's move to the next slide. So what is the effect of the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement, right? Why we should care? Why should we listen to this? So the association agreement will actually eliminate tariffs, will increase import quotas, will offer access to each other's public procurement markets, and will lower non-tariff barriers between the two regions. And these changes will result in higher economic growth. The EU and Mercosur countries will see the GDP increase as a result of the agreement. And higher GDP means more employment and higher wages. And this economic growth will also increase CO2 emissions, but much less than the proportional increase in GDP, because a lot of the trade will be done in less energy intensive sectors like services. The figure that you can see in the slide was produced by Maria Concepcion Latorre and others in their study of the economic impacts of the EU and Mercosur Association Agreement that has been commissioned and published by the Spanish government. Yeah, there you are. So the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement, it took more than 20 years to negotiate, a bit like the tango, but its ratification has taken so long that the world has actually changed since the negotiations were concluded 3 years ago. Unfortunately, we went through a global pandemic, experienced shortages of several products, and in February of this year, Russia invaded Ukraine. And in the EU, the policy discussion has actually shifted towards open strategic autonomy and the need to lower EU strategic dependencies. So open strategic autonomy is kind of a relatively open concept, which is actually understood better if we look at the regulation that have been approved or are in the discussion to furnish the policy. And in a way, one could argue that the regulation on due diligence, for instance, on forced labor, on deforestation, could be helpful for the agreement, since there's less need to strengthen the environmental and human rights provisions of the association agreements, since the EU has done it unilaterally. However, others, with good reasons, could actually argue that such a view disregards the cost of these regulations on Mercosur countries, for example, that they have to pay more to comply with the regulation without receiving anything in return. And the association agreement, which actually includes a series of regulatory dialogues that with the autonomous measures will become probably less relevant, since the EU has already regulated on these areas that were supposed to be discussed unilaterally and in an independent and autonomous way. So the discussion on dependencies, however, is probably more helpful to the association agreement, since the agreement offers a tool to diversify imports at a lower cost. And the Russian invasion of Ukraine has actually shown that the EU needs to make friends to get these countries on board and to diversify its sources of supplies across key critical products ranging from minerals, energy, and agricultural commodities to certain chemicals. And some of these are abundant in the Mercosur countries. So, and to make friends and to get the imports that are in high demand, the EU need carrots in addition to, or rather than sticks. So let me move to the next slide, and let me finish by trying to answer the question of the debate, which is protectionism, does it show its face? And the answer is absolutely. Mercosur has a relatively high level of tariffs, and the association agreement offers the EU companies the possibility to be the first in jumping these tariffs. It also offers regulatory and political cooperation between the two regions when the EU wants to be a geopolitical power. So it is actually now the time to ratify the agreement, and we can discuss this later during the questions and answer. Probably the elections in Brazil, which are scheduled for the 2nd of October, probably if there is a change in government, Lula's government is ready to reopen the EU-Mercosur Association Agreement. But this discussion, which will include the environment and climate, might also include areas where the EU has achieved important gains in the negotiation, for instance, market access or for manufacturing goods and government procurement. So if we move to my final slide, this is the end of my presentation. I hope it's been useful, and many thanks for everyone for listening. At the European Centre for International Political Economy, we're hosting an ongoing project on EU-Mercosur relationship, which includes paper, blogs, and videos. So feel free to visit our website if you want to learn more about it. Thanks.